Hello and welcome to another episode of CollectaThoughts, the show where I collect my thoughts on video games, and today we're coming back with Pokémon Legends Arceus, a new Pokémon game that came out just 2 months after the last Pokémon game, but to be fair, it is a actually new Pokemon game and not a remaster, which I think makes it a lot more exciting to play at least. And not only that, but also because it represents such a big shift in Pokemon and what kind of gameplay you expect out of a Pokemon game. It's a bit weird that it took them this long to take this direction. Let's be honest, I think people have been asking for a game like this since maybe the GameCube, maybe even before. You know, when they saw Pokemon Snap on the Nintendo 64, they were like, wait, you can do this, but you can't do a Pokemon game that does slightly similar things. And honestly, Pokemon Snap is gonna be brought up here because I do think while this is a new game, a completely new Pokemon type of game, it does take a lot of clues from other Pokemon games in the way that it works, and Pokemon Snap being a big one. So for those who don't know, and if you don't know, you've probably been very confused by what I've said so far, but basically this new Pokemon game is an actual third-person game where you hunt for Pokemon in open areas, which you might think, well, that's just Sword and Shield, but the difference here is in the mechanics and how you catch these Pokemons and how much more direct and tactile it is. This time around you can catch Pokemons without even starting a fight with them. You can do it, in a way stealthily, and that's kind of a big part of the game. I would say the biggest part of the game. A focus has been taken away from weakening the Pokemon and pushed more towards catching them off guard or distracting them in some way, which makes sense with this more direct and physical approach to catching Pokemons, I guess it would be a way to put it. Not to say that the RPG elements are no longer here, they still are. You can still very much catch Pokemons in the traditional way, but it's clearly not the ideal way or the optimized way, especially since one of the things that changes here is that completing the Pokédex isn't just about catching all the Pokémons, it's about catching all the Pokémons a bunch of times. Actually, that's not quite correct. Now the Pokédex works in a way that there are different objectives for each Pokémon. Most Pokémons have very similar objectives like catch them X amount of times or defeat it X amount of times, which leads to you just catching a lot more Pokemons in general and also diminishing the necessity to engage in fights with Pokemon, since if your goal is to catch a lot of Pokemons and you want to do that in the most efficient way possible, then the way to do that is to catch them off guard, stealthily, or simply a way to catch them without entering a fight, because that would be technically the slowest way to do it. That being said, there is some nuance here, because while stealth is the primary option to catch Pokemons, there is a lot of options within that main thing. For example, some Pokemons fly or are more agile than others, or maybe they detect you from farther away than others, and so for those Pokemons, maybe a Pokeball that can go further or faster is more useful. Or for example, for heavy Pokemons, there's a heavy ball which allows you to catch those Pokemons, but at the drawback of that ball being heavier, so it just doesn't go as far when you throw it. Which also means that this game has some new Pokeballs. It is mostly that though, the ones I just mentioned, the one that goes really far and the one that doesn't really go far but catches heavy Pokemon. And then we also have the classics like the regular Pokeball, the Great Ball, the Ultra Ball. I do think they could have done something more interesting here. I think what they have substituting this instead is some other balls that aren't Pokeballs, but things you can throw to change your chances of catching a Pokeball. Like for example, you can throw a mud ball to confuse a Pokemon, or you can send, for example, a piece of fruit that will attract certain Pokemons, which can be helpful, for example, in a situation where a Pokemon is in a somewhat open area where you don't really have a place to hide. Here, hiding being something that you mostly do in tall grass. There's also some other item made options like smoke bombs, but personally I do wish there were more environmental ways to hide yourself. I do think you would add a bit of variety to the gameplay, because for the most part I will say that 90% of the gameplay here that I did was just walking around on grass, throwing Pokeballs at Pokemon. Regardless though, what I was talking about was the other items, and yeah, I mean, do you have items that allow you to change the circumstances to make it easier to catch a Pokemon? But it's honestly nothing particularly incredible. Like I said before, there isn't a whole lot going on in this open world that allow you to do stealth besides crawling in tall grass or standing behind a rock. And while you do have all of these items, I'll be honest, for the most part, I really found myself not using a whole lot of it, and you can just kind of sneak behind most Pokemon. In fact, especially as you start getting some of the better Pokeballs later on, it definitely starts feeling almost like a third-person shooter, except instead of, killing the Pokemons, you're catching them, which is also something interesting to bring on. I didn't really find myself doing a whole lot of fighting in this game. It is mostly about catching Pokemons. One, because, again, it is a lot better to simply catch a Pokemon than fight it, and you get incentive for it with the way the Pokédex works, but also you still get XP while catching Pokemons this way, which means even though you're not defeating or fighting anything, your Pokemons are still evolving, the ones in your party I mean. And honestly, that's kind of the secret sauce of this game, is making everything kind of work with the core of the gameplay, which is catching Pokemons in this third-person style. Would I say action stealth game? Maybe, even though it feels very odd to say it for a Pokemon game, but I guess it's what it is. Regardless though, it is the main focus of the game, and it is something that is surprisingly done well. It feels fresh, it feels new in the Pokemon world, and that's probably why I found myself playing this so much. I ended up playing this for over a week every day, and I'm not on vacation, so this has been pretty much my life. Now though, let's change to some other topics of the game. I want to talk about the story very quickly, because I don't think there's much of a point in going too deeply into it. Mostly the story here is, for kids. It is a Pokemon story, it is very simple, but there are quite a lot of things here for fans, and also it's interesting in the way that it informs the game setting, because Pokemon Legends takes place in the past, which is a very interesting setting for Pokemon, as you get to kind of exist in this, very old-timey Japan looking setting with Pokemon. So, you'll see Pokemon helping with a farm, for example. And that's kind of cool, seeing, hey, the Pokemon being useful in this different time period is an interesting thing to think about. And it's also cool just to see how that affects some of the things in the games, like for example, Pokeballs don't look like Pokeballs. They kind of just look like they're made out of wood or steel. It is pretty cool in that way. Also, simply the way it does the aesthetic of Pokemon, but in this setting, is also cool, but I'll talk a bit more about that in the graphics. The other thing I wanted to talk about with the story, and I think I probably already annoyed some people by saying it's for kids, and the reason for that is because there is also quite a lot for people who are Pokemon fans and fans of the lore of Pokemon. Clearly, a lot of the characters in this game are surrogates for other Pokemons in other Pokemon games, especially relating to Team Galactic, so the Pokemon Diamond and Pearl that just got remakes recently relate quite heavily to this game and their characters. And I'm sure those people are having a field day with this, but personally I didn't really care that much. I've never been too deep into the Pokemon lore. I've seen a lot of it, but I'll be honest, I never liked it a whole lot. But I will say that if you do like it, that there is quite a lot here for you, and I think you'll be satisfied, I guess. Now moving on though, I want to talk a bit about the open world, and it's only sort of an open world. There's open world areas and they're divided, And then we have a base where you return to every time you come back from one of those areas, which is a bit disappointing to me. I do think it would have been really cool if this was just a whole island you could explore all at once, but it's okay, I guess. The way it works is you have a base where you get your main missions. You can also get some side missions, and you can also, of course, change Pokemons, heal them, buying items, crafting items. There's a crafting system now. I'm not gonna go into it. It's a crafting system. You get items while you're in the open world, and then you use them to craft things. You can craft Pokeballs. That's a big one. But honestly, a lot of these can also just be done in the open world, thankfully, which I do think is a good thing because it saves the trouble of, for example, when you run out of Pokeballs, to have to just come back to base to get more, which is really annoying because, you know, in the early Pokemon games, you'd buy like 50 Pokeballs and you'd be like, I don't have to worry about this for like 12 hours of gameplay. But here, that very much is not the case. You're going through Pokeballs like it's no one's business. Like I said earlier, you're not just catching them all, you're catching them all X 25 times. And that's fine, as long as, you know, don't make me come back to the village just to make more Pokeballs. And they don't, thankfully. You can even just buy them outright while outside. You can also organize your Pokemons while in the open world, which is also an amazing feature because, once again, you're catching way more Pokemons than usual. So keeping your, what would in other Pokemon games be the PC, organized is a pure necessity. Also in this open world, of course, is where you do the core of the gameplay, catching Pokemons, also catching items to craft other items that help you catch more Pokemons. So, you know, that's the loop of the game, and it's a very addicting one. I'll definitely say that's probably why I stuck so much time with this game and why I almost completed the Pokédex before this review. Because honestly, the story isn't really pushing you forward in an interesting way. Things are happening. It is interesting how the hell you ended up in this time period, but to me it never felt like it was written in an interesting way, and it also never really felt like there was much urgency to what was going on until like the very end of the game, which I also have to say I wasn't a huge fan of the end of the game. It just kind of happens. This game doesn't have an Elite Four, it doesn't have gyms, so the way it progresses is a bit different. Now instead of that we have bosses, which play in a third-person style shooter kind of thing. It's very weird to explain. You still very much use the controls that you would use to catch Pokemons. During these sections you get an infinite item you can throw, but it throws like a regular Pokeball. So it's not very satisfying, especially because it doesn't feel nearly as good as it does when you hit a Pokemon with a Pokeball. Honestly, they really nailed that feeling of, you know, you throw a Pokeball, it hits the Pokemon, it gets inside the ball and you're like, oh, is it gonna go in or not? They really nailed that feeling, but for these bosses, they didn't. I was constantly having to look at their life bar to see if I was actually doing any damage. It's very hard to see if I was actually hitting them or not. And the gameplay of the bosses themselves was not particularly great either. You're just avoiding attacks and hitting them when you can. I think this one was a bit weird, especially since these bosses are always different new Pokemon, which is fine, but I think of all the times you could have done some cheap reusing of Pokemons, it would have been this. I think it would have been really cool to just fight regular Pokemons, except it's you against this really big Pokemon. Even though that does also bring the problem of why the hell would you be fighting Pokemons like this when you have your own Pokemons to do the fighting for you? So it makes sense story-wise that these aren't like regular Pokemons, but you could have made something up. You could have just been like, oh, this is a big Snorlax and he's gonna roll over you if you don't get out of the way. Or maybe just a way to integrate your Pokemons into this fight would have been cool. It really can feel kind of bland, just it's you dodging attacks from this glowing figure that kind of looks like a Pokemon. Kinda is a bit misleading here. These are Pokemons that you can get after the fact, but before you do, they are very much just complete new characters to you. Which again, not a bad thing, but I do think you would have added to it if these were Pokemons you recognized in some way. Also, the combat just doesn't feel great in these sections, like I said, so, you know, potato, potato. Now, going back to the open world though, what I want to talk about is traversing and also this new type of Pokemon. New type, maybe not the best word for it, they're just regular Pokemon but really big, or generally bigger and stronger. You'll find them around the world. They'll have red eyes and they'll usually be higher evolutions of the Pokemons you can find in that area. And because of that, of course, they're a sort of an obstacle or also just a much harder Pokemon to fight. With a lot of the times, depending on where you are in the story or what you're doing, being somewhat of a barrier to a location, especially since not only do your Pokemon take damage, but now you the player also do. But I'm gonna get into that in a second. Now, these giant monsters are not just bigger in stats, they're physically bigger, which I think is a really cool thing that this game is doing. In other Pokemon games, Pokemons have different stats and different sizes from each other, even within the same species. And that was reflected in their stats, but usually you really didn't get to see it much in combat or in the world. But here in Arceus, Pokemons are the size that they are listed as, which is really cool, I think. It adds such a new level of immersion to this world and also just a appeal to catch bigger or smaller Pokemons in the world. For example, I caught one of these bigger Pokemons as a Scyther, and then it evolved into a 11-foot tall Scizor that literally towers anything in this game. It was incredible to look at. So yeah, if you're looking for bigger Pokemons to just kind of make a, you know, a big gang of Pokemons, I don't know, these are the ones to go for. They're called Alpha Pokemons, which I think is hilarious. The only way to make it funny if they were called like Chat Pokemons. But the size of Pokemons is not dictated simply by that. Every Pokemon is their own random size, and you can find bigger and smaller ones throughout the world, which I think is pretty cool as well. Sorry if I'm saying pretty cool a lot, it's just a pretty cool game, okay? Now, the other thing I mentioned before these alpha Pokemons was the traversing. And this is done not with your own Pokemons, but instead you have a flute that calls this Pokemon, the special Pokemon that you use to ride on. I don't want to spoil what they are because some of them come very late in the game. Even the first one in this game was only given to me after like 4 hours of gameplay, so I don't want to spoil them, but I will say that it is what you expect, you know, to traverse through different types of terrains that might be hard on your own, or, you know, simply to make it faster. And honestly, the way they work might actually surprise you. But I will kind of hint at it by saying Zelda Breath of the Wild climbing. Also, I mentioned Breath of the Wild and I didn't do it in the way that every other reviewer is probably doing for this game. Maybe, I don't know, I try not to watch reviews for games I'm gonna review myself. Regardless, it's pretty interesting. You get to see some things you don't expect to with these Pokemons, but also in that same way, it's kind of disappointing you can't use your own Pokemons to do this, especially for just riding around and traveling faster in just regular terrain. And honestly, I'm not surprised. Obviously, I think everyone at this point knows. There's even a very popular YouTube video I haven't watched about it on YouTube, the one about logistics or whatever. But yeah, there's too many Pokemons in Pokemon to be able to allow a level of animations and interactivity, but this doesn't have every Pokemon in the game. It has like 200 something. And realistically, you could make only some of them be able to be rideable in some way, which I think does make it a lot more realistic that this is something they could have done for this game. For example, it could have been like, you can only ride Ponytas and Luxrays. No, you ride these very specific Pokemons, which, to be fair, I believe that every Pokemon that you ride in this game is a new Pokemon made for this game, which I think is kind of cool, kind of like the bosses. But once again, kind of like the bosses, I rather do this with my Pokemon or Pokemons that I couldn't do this with before, that I have some connection to in some way from playing other Pokemon games. Regardless though, speaking of traversal, of course we have to talk about why these specific methods are needed, and that is because of course there's quite a lot of terrains depending on which area you are. Of course you have a more oceany focused area, then you have a more snowy area, a more deserty area, a more swampy area. The things you expect out of games like this. It really doesn't have any kind of crazy location, honestly. It is all very by the numbers, which does kind of bring it down a bit. It would have been cool to see some different, more unique settings, especially since this takes place in a completely different time period to the other games. But this isn't really a complaint and more just a I wish. But I guess this also leads us now to talk about the graphics a little bit, which have already sparked a lot of, oh, it looks like a PS2 game. But PS2 games don't look bad. And that's kind of my opinion as well. It looks like a game from the GameCube PS2 era, but that's not a bad thing. And in a lot of ways, it does feel like it could have run on one of those consoles, to be honest. Especially with the way the world is segmented. But yeah, it doesn't look great. I think my biggest problem with it is the clipping. There's so much clipping with the Pokemon especially. Like if a Pokemon has dangling ears, sometimes in different positions it will just clip into the backs of their body, and it's just something distracting that I have no idea why it's there. Because clearly they know about it, so it's kind of hard to know why they didn't fix it. And why I say that is, it will happen in the main story. A Pokemon in the main story clips into itself or clips into other Pokemon, and it's just kind of awkward and distracting, and I don't know how that got through. So on a technical side, this isn't impressing anyone, but in terms of the actual aesthetic, it does look nice. Once again, it takes place in a different era, which I think adds a lot to it, seeing these different style of houses and different types of clothing on the characters, with some really great character design in my opinion. And then the open world itself can be very moody, with the day and night cycle that changes the appearance of the world quite a lot. And of course has gameplay repercussions as well, because some Pokemons only show up at certain times and things like that, which also add to it. And honestly, I don't dislike the way this game looks, but I do think its rougher edges do kind of make me not be 100% behind it. It's not just the clipping, but also the Pokemon models feel like they don't have a consistent art style. I know that might seem like weird, but it legitimately feels like sometimes when you put characters next to each other, there's this weird disconnect. For me, the biggest example of this is Rapidash, the horse. To me, it looks like it's made out of squares, like noticeably so. Like it's missing polygons compared to other Pokemons. It's very awkward to look at. Obviously, Rapidash is a first-gen Pokemon that is also just very simple by nature, but when you put Rapidash in this game next to any other Pokemon, it looks like you're looking at two different games. I'm not joking. Which makes me think this game could have maybe used with a different art style, especially again with the different setting it already has. Or maybe just go for a more cel-shaded look rather than the more traditional, normal Pokemon look, which I guess would be anime going for realism but not really kind of style, if that makes any sense. Of course though, it is mostly edge cases, and I don't think it is something that detracts from the game in a big way, so I still think the game looks okay. Or maybe another way to phrase it, it looks like a PS2 game, and that's okay. Because there's a lot of PS2 games that look amazing, and honestly that look better than this game. The Metal Gear games, the Silent Hill games on the PS2 still look better than this game, I'm not gonna lie. But that's okay, this game doesn't look bad, that's not what I'm trying to say. Moving on, the soundtrack is good, it's okay. I like it, but also I don't think I'm gonna be listening to it outside of this game, which is fine. It's very evocative of Diamond and Pearl, which this game is obviously very connected to, and it sounds good. You know that this is not my strong suit, I don't know much about music. It sounds good to me. If you like Pokemon soundtracks, this one won't disappoint. That's really all I have to say. Now, some of the things I want to talk about before I finish this review off is the combat. I know I haven't really talked much about the combat, but I'm telling you, you don't do a lot of it outside of the story, at least not in my experience. You do have to do it to complete the Pokédex if you want to go for 100%. But honestly, I was having a lot of fun avoiding combat. But regardless, during combat here, it very much plays out like regular Pokemon, except you can move your character around, which is a cool gimmick if every other Pokemon fan game or fan mod to another game hasn't done that already, like one of the Minecraft Pokemon mods or the Pokemon VR fan game on the Oculus Quest. So if you're a big Pokemon fan and you tried some stuff that wasn't made by the Pokemon people, then you probably experienced this before. So while it is cool to finally see it done officially in some capacity, I think a lot of us have already experienced this in ways that might even be more interesting. Regardless, what actually changes in the gameplay now is fighting multiple Pokemons, because of course now while you're in the wild and fight those Pokemons, because of course in that situation it isn't like a traditional fight where each trainer gets one Pokemon out at a time. Instead, Pokemons can gang up on you, and that's kind of a gameplay feature in a way. You can get overwhelmed and completely wrecked if you're not careful. Also, a situation where this might happen a lot more often is in these new special areas where time is distorted in a way. I don't want to go too deep into it because I do think it is a bit of a spoiler, but these are basically areas where Pokemons will keep spawning and rare items will keep spawning for a specific amount of time, but also, to counteract that, these Pokemons are also a lot harder and they will usually immediately spot you. But even with that, these are still, great ways to farm specific items or even Pokemon. Until of course they overwhelm you and they kill you basically. Once you die in Pokemon Legends, you don't really die, you kinda just get sent back to base and you lose some items. These items can then be rescued by other players with this sort of multiplayer feature of the game of the lost bags. Basically you can recover lost bags from other players throughout the map, and then you get a reward for doing so, and the other player hopefully gets their bag back with their items that they lost, which can be quite a lot because it's based on percentage and not some kind of locked random number. So the more items you have in your inventory, the more you're risking to lose when you die, quote unquote. That all being said though, I do have a critique about being ganged up on by Pokemons, and that is the ability for you to gang up on them back. Why can't you do that, is what I'm trying to say. That would have been such a cool mechanic to just release all 5 Pokemons at once, or at least 2, in the open world and attack other Pokemons. I don't know, it sounds mean, but it would be fun. You have to agree with that, right? Let me gang up on harder Pokemons, that's what I'm trying to say before I start sounding crazy. Or, just help me not be ganged up by other Pokemons by letting me play with multiple Pokemons at once. This is something you can do in other Pokemon games with the tag duels, so I don't know why you can't do it here. I mean, I know why. This game isn't particularly the most polished thing ever, and I'm sure it was probably quite rushed. But regardless, I don't know, add it in an update or something. It would completely change the game, I think. Especially since it wouldn't really be that hard to add, since you can already kind of flip through Pokemons while in the middle of battle. Since there's technically 2 battle menus. There's a battle menu you can pick while in the game where, Pokemons are moving and things like that. This being the one where I think you could add that ability to add an extra Pokemon to the battle. Then of course you have the one where it's a paused menu and you're kind of just looking through your inventory, which you'd hope you use a lot less since you have all these, quick shortcuts to items that you can use your D-pad and your shoulder buttons to change in between while in combat. But no, it's still faster to just go into the menu and pick the item in my experience. It's the difference between picking between a list and cycling through items, and picking through the list is just a lot faster for me. Also, I want to finish this review because I've been going for almost 30 minutes at this point and I feel like I've talked enough about it. The combat is fine. Okay. Pokemon Legend Arceus is a game that clearly, was rushed, or maybe it was very experimental and that's why there's so many rough edges, but it's also because it's so experimental that I like it. It's so different from other Pokemon games that it feels fresh and new, and I've been desperately wanting that from Pokemon for the past 10 years. And I know there's people who've been waiting for even longer than that, so for those people, hell yes, I would recommend this game. And I'm giving Pokemon Legend Arceus a 7 out of 10. For reference, I gave Brilliant Diamond a 6, I believe, which, It was a regular Pokemon game, it didn't really do anything amazing. This one does a lot of new things and it's very cool, but it's also very rough around the edges with a lot of visual bugs and just other things that seem to be kind of missing that really should be here. Like again, the ability to fight with multiple Pokemons or having an open world that isn't divided into sections. Even though that I don't think would have changed even with a lot of development time. Recommendations wise though, like I said, if you've been dying for something new in the Pokemon world, Pokemon Snap just wasn't enough, this is it. It plays a lot like Pokemon Snap if you really think about it, where you're catching a lot of Pokemons again and again for different reasons. In a very similar way that in Pokemon Snap you take a lot of pictures of the same Pokemon over and over again. That was kind of the reference I was alluding to very early on in the review, remember that? It's okay if you don't remember, it was like 20 minutes ago. Now if you only want the same game every year, then you're already taken care of. You got Brilliant Diamond 2 months ago. No worries, right? If you're not into Pokemon though, do I think this is gonna change your mind? Maybe. The core gameplay loop is so different that it might change you over. But what if you hated was the RPG style combat, then this is not gonna change it. While I said that you do a lot less of it in this game, you still have to do it, especially to progress the story. Now in terms of value for the game and my recommendation of that, getting the game for full price, the game is content rich, I'm not gonna lie, so I do think you'll get your money's worth out of it. And part of me, even beyond just value, I do want this game to do better than Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, so it shows the Pokemon company that people want something new. But I can't in a good conscience do that as a recommendation. I can't be like, go give this company more money, they don't have enough. You know what I mean? So it's up to you. If you're in a situation where you can buy a new game, then I do think this one is worth it. It is content rich, like I said just now. There's a lot to do. You don't just catch the same Pokemon once, you're gonna catch each Pokemon a bunch of times. You're gonna fight each Pokemon a bunch of times. In terms of completing this game 100%, I would say given the time I've put into it so far that there is probably something like 50 hours maybe. Obviously, you know, this is based on how much I've played so far and I haven't 100%ed it, but it does feel like there's a lot to do in this game. Regardless though, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and nowadays also disliking, since it doesn't really make a difference anymore. But regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day, and gotta catch 'em all. Gotta catch 'em all. Pokemon. Gotta catch 'em all. Goodbye. That was awful.